I never thought that my daily walks with my dog, Max, would become the highlight of my solitary life. It all started a few months ago when my partner left for a long-term work assignment, leaving me and Max alone in our quiet suburban home. The silence was deafening, more than just the absence of noise. I had grown accustomed to it over the years, but this time felt different. Max, our loyal golden retriever, had been my constant companion for 7 years. We brought him home as a playful puppy, and over time, he became my anchor. While my partner worked long hours or traveled, Max was always there, greeting me with a wagging tail and those soulful eyes that seemed to understand far more than a dog should. One evening, the emptiness of the house pressed down on me. I tried filling the silence with music, the TV, even an audiobook, but nothing helped. After dinner, a lonely affair over reheated leftovers, I wandered out to the backyard with a cup of tea. Max stood by the fence, his ears perking up as I approached. He always stayed close, as if sensing that I needed him more on nights like these. I reached out, letting my hand rest on his golden fur. "You're all I've got tonight," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. Max responded with a soft whine, his breath warm against my hand. Our bond had always been special. He wasn't just a dog. He was my confidant, the one who filled the gaps left by my partner's absence. The evening stretched on, the minutes ticking by with an almost maddening slowness. I scrolled aimlessly through my phone, glancing at pictures of friends and their families. Their lives full of noise and chaos made the silence of my own life feel even more profound. Max shifted beside me, his head resting against my shoulder. "At least I'm not entirely alone," I said softly. He responded with a soft snort, his tail swishing lazily. Moments like this made me grateful for him, for the uncomplicated love he offered so freely. It wasn't the same as having my partner here, but it was enough to make the loneliness bearable. Eventually, the tea began to work its magic, the edges of my thoughts softening as I leaned against the fence. Max shifted again, pressing closer to me in a way that made it feel like he was trying to shield me from the emptiness of the house. I reached out, brushing my hand along his neck, and found myself talking to him without really thinking about it. "You know, Max, sometimes I wonder if he even notices how much time he spends away," I said. Max's ears twitched, and he turned his head to look at me, his eyes filled with a kind of understanding that made my chest ache. It was ridiculous, I knew, to project my feelings onto him, but in that moment, it felt like he understood me in a way no one else did. "Do you get it?" I continued, my hand still stroking his fur. Max let out a soft whine, his tail swishing gently. The backyard grew quieter, the only sounds the faint rustle of leaves and the soft rhythm of Max's breathing. I let my hand rest on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. It was calming, grounding in a way I desperately needed. The silence no longer felt so oppressive with Max beside me. It was almost comforting. As the night wore on, I found myself reflecting on the life my partner and I had built. It wasn't bad, not by any stretch. We had a beautiful home, financial stability, and a routine that worked for the most part. But somewhere along the way, it had begun to feel hollow, like something was missing. I couldn't pinpoint when it started, but the distance between us had grown, a quiet chasm neither of us seemed willing to acknowledge. Max nudged my hand with his nose, pulling me out of my thoughts. I smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Thanks, buddy," I said. "You always know when I need you." He responded with a soft whine, his eyes shining with a warmth that made my heart ache. It was moments like these that reminded me how much he meant to me, how much he had become a part of my life in ways I hadn't expected. He wasn't just a dog. He was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. I stayed in the backyard with Max for hours, the weight of the evening slowly lifting as his presence filled the empty spaces. By the time I finally headed back inside, I felt lighter, more at peace. Max followed me to the door, watching as I made my way inside. As I turned off the lights and lay down, I found myself whispering into the darkness, "Good night, Max. Thank you for being here." And as I said those words, Something struck me. The look in his eyes excited me. Maybe it was the tea. Maybe it was the loneliness. The longing to feel some excitement when you're alone with your dog. I didn't know yet, but later on, I would definitely find out. And it made me do things I would have never imagined. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of Max's paws pawing at the ground outside. He always seemed to know when I needed an extra push to start the day. I peered over the fence and couldn't help but smile as he let out a low, cheerful whine, almost like he was saying, "Good morning, let's get moving." I swung my legs over the side of the bed, pulling on my boots as I headed outside. All right, I'm up," I said. Max trotted to the gate, pausing to look back at me as if urging me to follow. It was our routine now. His quiet insistence that life goes on, even when the house felt too big and too quiet without my partner around. After breakfast, I grabbed Max's leash, his tail swishing with anticipation. His excitement grew as we made our way to the park, his whole body vibrating with energy. A walk was exactly what I needed to clear my mind and shake off the remnants of last night's reflections. The park was still waking up, the air crisp and fresh. The only sounds the occasional chirp of birds and the distant rustle of leaves. Max stayed close to my side as we walked, his steps steady and sure. It was one of the things I loved most about him. His calm, steady presence, even when the world felt chaotic. As we reached the edge of the park, I decided to let him run. He bounded ahead, his fur flowing in the wind, the sheer joy of it bringing a smile to my face. Watching him like that, so free and full of life, always made me feel a little lighter. I sat down on a nearby bench, letting the warmth of the sun wash over me as I kept an eye on Max. He was galloping through the fields now, his paws kicking up dust as he raced across the open land. "You're ridiculous," I called out to him, laughing as he turned back toward me, his tail swishing furiously. He trotted over, his breath coming in soft puffs as he nuzzled against my hand. For a while, we just sat there, the two of us, soaking in the quiet of the morning. I found myself talking to Max again, as I often did when it was just the two of us. There was something comforting about it, like he was a sounding board for the thoughts I couldn't quite say out loud to anyone else. "But I don't know, Max," I began. "Do you ever think about what life would be like if things were different? If we weren't stuck in this routine?" He looked at me with those big, expressive eyes, and I could almost imagine him saying, "I'm listening." It was silly, of course, to think that he understood the complexities of my thoughts. But in moments like this, it felt like he did. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for what we have. But sometimes it feels like something's missing, I sighed, leaning back against the bench. Max let out a soft whine, resting his head on my shoulder, and I felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry," I said. But Max didn't seem to mind. He stayed right there, his head on my shoulder, his tail swishing in slow, steady movements. It was moments like these that reminded me how much I relied on him. Not just as a dog, but as a companion, a friend who was always there when I needed him. As the morning wore on, we made our way back to the house. I spent the rest of the day tackling chores, the kind of mundane tasks that helped pass the time. Max followed me from room to room, his presence a constant comfort. He'd lie nearby, his eyes tracking my movements as if to say, "I'm here, don't worry." Later that evening, after dinner, I found myself back in the backyard with Max by my side. The loneliness I usually felt during my partner's absence was still there, but it wasn't as heavy as it had been the night before. Max had a way of filling the emptiness, making the silence feel less oppressive. But still, I was missing something, and each time I looked at Max, he told me he could feel that void. I reached out to stroke his fur, my fingers trailing along the soft strands. "You're a lifesaver," I said, my voice soft. Max responded with a soft snort, his tail swishing lazily. I smiled, leaning back against the fence, letting myself relax for the first time all day. The warmth of his body against mine was comforting, grounding in a way that nothing else seemed to be. As the evening stretched on, I found myself reflecting on the bond we shared. It wasn't just the loyalty or the companionship, though those things were certainly part of it. It was the way Max seemed to see me, to understand me in a way that felt almost human. He was more than just a dog. He was a reminder that I wasn't alone. Even in the quietest, loneliest moments, I stayed in the backyard with Max long after the sun had set. The two of us cocooned in the quiet warmth of our shared space. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself, but in that moment, it felt like enough. The days blurred together, the routine of my life steady but uninspiring. My partner's return was delayed again. Another trip that had stretched longer than planned. I told myself I was fine with it. After all, I'd grown accustomed to his absences. Yet, as the days passed, I found myself leaning on Max more and more. It was late afternoon when I stood in the backyard, brushing Max's fur while he stood patiently, his ears twitching in response to the faint sounds of the neighborhood. The golden light streaming through the trees bathed the yard in warmth. But I still felt cold inside. My thoughts wandered as I stared out at the fields, the weight of my own loneliness pressing against me. "Max," I called softly. He lifted his head, his eyes locking on mine as if he could sense the shift in my mood. Grabbing his leash, I led him out of the backyard. We didn't have a destination in mind, but the act of leaving the house felt like a small rebellion against the monotony. Max trotted beside me, his head held high, his fur flowing in the breeze. As we made our way to the open fields, his joy was infectious, and I felt myself smiling for the first time that day. Eventually, we ended up at a secluded meadow on the edge of the property. The meadow was quiet, the kind of place where the only sounds were the rustling of grass and the distant chirp of birds. I let Max roam free, watching as he bounded ahead, his tail swishing with enthusiasm. He'd always loved the outdoors, and seeing him so full of life eased the ache in my chest. I followed him through the meadow, the soft crunch of grass under my boots grounding me. Max darted between the trees, pausing every so often to glance back at me as if to make sure I was still there. His energy was contagious, and I felt a sense of calm settle over me, the tension in my shoulders easing as I inhaled the crisp, clean air. As we walked, my thoughts drifted to the life I had built with my partner. I loved him, at least I thought I did, but lately, that love felt more like a habit than a feeling. A quiet companionship that lacked the spark it once had. And in his absence, it was Max who had filled the void, his unwavering loyalty a balm to my restless heart. I found a quiet spot under a tree and sat down, watching as Max grazed nearby, his tail swishing as he explored. He eventually wandered back to me, nuzzling against my hand with a satisfied sigh. I reached out, scratching behind his ears, and he leaned into my touch, his warm, steady presence grounding me once again. "You're my rock," I said, my voice soft. Max looked at me, his expressive eyes filled with a warmth that made my chest tighten. It was moments like this that reminded me just how much he meant to me, how his presence had become a lifeline in a world that often felt too quiet. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the meadow. I stayed there with Max. The two of us cocooned in the peace of the moment. Time seemed to slow, the world outside the meadow fading away until it was just us. I felt a strange sense of clarity in that stillness, as if the weight of my thoughts had been lifted, leaving me free to simply exist. As we made our way back to the house, I realized how much I'd needed this time away from the backyard, from the routine, from the thoughts that had been circling my mind. Max trotted beside me, his steps in sync with mine, and I felt a surge of gratitude for him. He wasn't just my dog. He was my constant, my anchor, the one thing that made the loneliness bearable. The walk back was quiet, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Max moved steadily, his breath coming in soft puffs as we made our way home. I reached out, letting my hand rest on his neck, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known I was searching for. When we arrived back at the house, the backyard felt less empty, less oppressive. Max followed me inside, his tail swishing as he settled into his bed. I sank onto the couch, feeling a quiet sense of contentment. The bond I shared with Max was unlike anything else in my life. Pure, uncomplicated, and steady. That night, as I lay in bed with Max's soft whines drifting in from the backyard, I found myself reflecting on the connection we shared. It wasn't something I could easily put into words, but it was real, tangible in a way that filled the empty spaces left by my partner's absence. Max wasn't just a dog to me. He was my partner, my confidant, and in many ways, my closest friend. And for now, that was enough. Or was it? The following night was darker than usual. The kind of inky blackness that wrapped around the house and pressed against the windows. The air felt heavy, charged as though a storm was waiting to break. Max stood in his bed, his ears twitching as I approached. I hadn't turned on the lights, letting the faint glow of the moon guide me as I made my way to him. I leaned against the doorframe, my hand resting on his fur. The quiet of the house was overwhelming. The absence of my partner a stark reminder of how much space he occupied even when he wasn't here. My hand found its way to Max's fur, stroking absent-mindedly as my thoughts swirled. "But you're all I have right now," I murmured. Max responded with a soft whine, his breath warm against my hand. He turned his head to look at me, his deep, dark eyes filled with an understanding that made my chest ache. I let out a shaky breath, my hand stilling on his fur. "But it's just us, isn't it?" The words hung in the air, heavier than I intended, but Max didn't seem to mind. He nuzzled closer, his warmth seeping into me as the weight of my loneliness pressed harder. The connection between us felt different that night, stronger somehow. It wasn't just the comfort of his presence or the way he seemed to sense my every mood. It was something deeper, a bond that went beyond words or logic. I leaned against the doorframe, closing my eyes as I let myself sink into the moment. The quiet, the warmth of Max against me. Time seemed to blur as we stayed like that, the two of us cocooned in the stillness. My hand moved to his head, my fingers trailing along the soft curve of his ears. He let out a low, contented sigh, his tail swishing gently against the floor. The sound of his breathing, steady and rhythmic, filled the room, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. I opened my eyes, glancing down at him. His gaze met mine, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The house, the empty backyard, the ache of my partner's absence. It all dissolved, leaving just the two of us. My hand lingered on his head, my fingers brushing through his fur as I felt an inexplicable pull. A connection so strong it left me breathless. Max shifted, pressing closer to me, his warmth a balm to the cold emptiness that had settled in my chest. I leaned forward slightly, my forehead resting against his as I closed my eyes again, letting the moment wash over me. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt, a mix of comfort and longing, of gratitude and something deeper that I couldn't quite name. "I don't know what I'd do without you," I whispered. Max responded with a soft nuzzle, his nose brushing against my cheek as his tail swished once more. It was as though he understood, as though he felt the same unspoken bond that had grown between us. The minutes stretched on, the world outside the house forgotten as I stayed there with Max. The connection between us wrapped around me like a lifeline. It wasn't just that he was here, that he was loyal and steady and always by my side. It was the way he made me feel, seen, understood in a way I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't sure how long we stayed like that, but when I finally pulled back, my heart was racing, my breath shallow. Max's eyes were locked on mine, his expression calm but intense, as though he was waiting for something. My hand lingered on his head, my fingers trailing down to his neck as I struggled to find the words to explain what I was feeling. But there were no words for this. No way to capture the depth of what Max meant to me, of how his presence had filled the empty spaces in my life. All I could do was stand there, my hand on his fur, my heart pounding as I tried to process the moment. Eventually, I leaned back against the doorframe, my hands still resting on Max as he settled beside me once more. The weight of the moment lingered, a quiet reminder of the bond we shared, of the way he had become so much more than just a dog to me. As the night wore on, I felt a sense of clarity settle over me, the kind that came not from logic but from something deeper, Something instinctive. Max had always been my anchor. My constant in a world that often felt too chaotic, too lonely. And in that moment, I realized just how much I needed him. Not just as a companion but as a lifeline. A reminder that I wasn't alone. The house was still silent as I eventually made my way back to bed. Max's soft whines following me as I walked. He stayed by the door, watching as I disappeared inside. His presence a quiet reassurance that I wasn't entirely alone. I lay there in the darkness, my thoughts still swirling but my heart a little lighter, a little more at peace. As I drifted off to sleep, I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Max, for everything." He was looking at me in a way that made me feel he could sense what I felt. The loneliness, the desire for some excitement. His eyes were telling me he was the one who could give that to me when my partner was away. Something in me started to shift, asking myself if I needed to give in to those temptations. Maybe I shook my head. No, although something in me definitely wanted to. A part of me wanted to find out what he was up to. Maybe later on, I would give in to that temptation. But not yet. I wasn't ready for it. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, casting a golden glow across the room. I blinked away the heaviness of the night before, still lingering in the back of my mind. Max was already up, standing by the fence, his ears twitching as he watched me approach. "Morning, buddy," I murmured. He leaned into my hand, his warm breath tickling my wrist. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. As I got ready for the day, Max followed me from room to room, his presence a constant comfort. The events of the previous night lingered in my mind, vivid and raw, as though they had etched themselves into my memory. I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us, though I wasn't sure what it meant. After breakfast, I found myself back in the backyard, Max at my side. The quiet of the house felt less oppressive today, more like a cocoon than a void. I let my fingers trail through Max's fur, my mind drifting as I tried to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. For years, I had buried my feelings, pushed them down beneath the surface to keep life running smoothly. But Max had a way of drawing them out, of making me confront the loneliness I had tried so hard to ignore. His unwavering loyalty, his quiet understanding. It had been a lifeline, one I hadn't realized I needed until it was too late. Max was looking at me with those eyes again, and all of a sudden, I just couldn't resist it anymore. We had a bond so close. I just needed to give in. It was as if he was telling me that he could fill my void of loneliness with some excitement. I leaned in towards him, and he immediately knew. I kissed him, and there was such a tension between us that I can't quite name. His tail swished furiously, and of course, I can't go into full details, but I can tell that I let myself go. I went on my knees and turned around. Well, when Max was doing his thing, I could have never imagined that it could be that good. The bond we shared even strengthened what we were doing. It was so amazing. After, I think, 30 to 40 minutes, he finished, and I sighed, leaning back against the fence. "What are we doing?" I asked softly, my voice tinged with a mix of wonder and confusion. He looked at me, his deep eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, it felt like he was waiting for an answer too. The rest of the day passed in a haze of mundane tasks and fleeting moments of clarity. I cleaned the house, tended to the yard, and walked Max through the neighborhood, all the while feeling the weight of the bond we shared pressing against me. It wasn't something I could ignore anymore, no matter how hard I tried. By the time evening rolled around, I felt restless, a nervous energy thrumming through me that I couldn't quite shake. I grabbed Max's leash and headed out the door, needing to clear my head. The air was crisp and cool, the faint scent of grass drifting on the breeze as we made our way to the park. The paths were quiet, lit only by the soft glow of the moon and the occasional flicker of fireflies in the distance. Max trotted beside me, his steps steady and confident as he matched my pace. I let him lead the way, trusting his instincts as we wandered deeper into the fields. We eventually found ourselves at a secluded spot under the stars, the grass damp with dew and the air humming with the quiet sounds of the night. I sat down on a fallen log, Max settling at my feet, his body warm against the coolness of the evening. The stars overhead were bright, scattered across the sky like shards of glass. And for a moment, I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. Max shifted, resting his head on my knee, and I reached down to stroke his fur. The familiar motion grounded me. "You've always been here for me," I said softly, my voice carrying on the stillness of the night. He responded with a quiet whine, his tail swishing against the ground. It was such a small thing, but it filled my chest with a warmth that chased away the lingering shadows of doubt and loneliness. Max wasn't just my dog. He was my partner, my anchor, my constant in a world that often felt too big and too empty. As the minutes stretched into hours, I found myself speaking aloud, the words spilling out like water from a dam. I told Max about my fears, my doubts, the ache of a marriage that had become more routine than connection. I spoke of the nights spent alone, of the moments when his presence had been the only thing keeping me from falling apart. And through it all, Max stayed by my side, his quiet presence a reassurance that I wasn't alone. His loyalty, his love, it was unlike anything I had ever known, and it filled the spaces in my heart that I hadn't realized were empty. The walk back was quiet, the kind of silence that felt full of meaning rather than emptiness. Max moved steadily, his breath coming in soft puffs as we made our way home. I glanced over at him, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips as I reached out to brush my fingers against his fur. When we arrived back at the house, the backyard felt warmer, more inviting than it had in weeks. Max followed me inside, into his bed, as I curled up on the couch. The quiet companionship we shared was enough, a reminder that even in the loneliest moments, I wasn't truly alone. I let my head rest against the couch, my fingers tracing absent patterns through Max's fur. "You're my rock," I whispered, and Max shifted closer, his body pressed against mine as his tail swished softly. The connection between us was undeniable, a bond that went beyond words or explanation. It was something I didn't fully understand, but I knew it was real, and that was enough. As the hours ticked by, the house grew quieter, the world outside fading into the stillness of the night. I stayed on the couch with Max, his presence a steady comfort as I let myself drift into a peaceful haze. Whatever the future held, I knew one thing for certain. Max would be there, his loyalty unwavering, his love constant in a world that so often felt unpredictable. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity, a quiet certainty that I wasn't alone. And as I drifted off to sleep, Max's soft whines drifting in from the backyard, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. When he lay there beside me, I was questioning myself if it was okay what we had done. Am I just weird, or is this pretty normal? I just don't know. What do you think of it? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you.